In the heart of ancient Carthage, where the perfume of burning incense drifted over terracotta rooftops and temple stones hummed with age, there stood a city unlike any other. Not just a hub of trade or warfare, but a citadel of gods, especially one god, Baal Hammon, lord of the burning sky. His name was whispered with awe, love, and terror. Each morning, the city awakened to the sound of temple bells and chants that rolled like waves from the great sanctuaries. Merchants paused to bow. Farmers blessed their tools. Even generals, bronze-clad and battle-scarred, would stop before his towering altar. To live in Carthage was to live under the eyes of the divine, and above all it was to live in the shadow of sacrifice. Carthage's spiritual heart pulsed through two central deities, Baal Hammon, the Sky Father, and Tanit, the radiant queen of the heavens. Baal, often depicted with a horned crown and a serene yet impassive gaze, was the giver of life and taker of it. Tanit, protector of the city and guardian of fertility, stood beside him as both consort and equal. Together, they represented the balance between life and death. Baal reigned over time, seasons, and kings, while Tanit safeguarded birth, women, and the destiny of Carthage's bloodlines. Where Baal burned, Tanit healed. Where Baal demanded, Tanit consoled. Shrines to them stood in nearly every home and neighborhood. Clay plaques and amulets bore their likenesses. In them, Carthaginians did not just see gods. They saw reflections of their own city, powerful, proud, and ultimately vulnerable to the will of the cosmos. No aspect of Carthaginian religion has stirred more debate than the Tophet, a sacred precinct where urns of ash and bone lay buried beneath stelae inscribed with prayers, symbols, and dedications to Baal and Tanit. Greek and Roman writers, especially Diodorus and Plutarch, painted it as a site of horror, alleging child sacrifice on a city-wide scale. They wrote of infants laid on bronze altars, of drums drowning out screams, of priests casting young bodies into fire as an offering to a demanding god. Yet archaeology offers a more nuanced, though still chilling, picture. Thousands of urns containing the remains of infants, both newborn and young, have been uncovered. Were these all sacrifices, or tragic natural deaths later dedicated to the gods? Scholars remain divided. What's undeniable is the symbolism. To the Carthaginians, the Tophet was a place of immense spiritual weight. Whether driven by grief, faith, or desperation, the people of Carthage offered their most precious gifts to the heavens and prayed they be heard. Religious life in Carthage was not led by kings but by priests, whose authority sometimes rivaled that of generals. Clad in long robes, often embroidered with sacred sigils, they maintained the great temples and enforced divine law. Their rituals were intricate and often exclusive. Offerings of wine, grain, and incense accompanied chants in Phoenician tongue. Sacred fires were tended night and day, representing the unbroken link between Carthage and the divine. Particularly sacred were the high priests of Baal, who wielded influence far beyond the sanctuary walls. They advised the Senate, blessed military campaigns, and even interpreted omens before key battles. In Carthage, state and temple were not separate. They were one. Carthage's architecture mirrored its beliefs. The temples were not towering like Roman basilicas or sprawling like Greek sanctuaries. Instead, they were solemn, compact, and designed for intimacy with the gods. The sanctuary of Tanit and shrine of Baal Hammon were located near the Tophet, built of local sandstone and adorned with palm-shaped motifs, crescent moons, and horned discs. These symbols reinforced the divine presence that watched over every harvest, every voyage, and every war. Despite Roman disdain and later destruction, these holy sites once served as the true pulse of Carthaginian society. More than its navy, its walls, or its gold, religion shaped Carthage's destiny. The rituals of Carthage, while horrifying to the Romans and Greeks, were not unique in the broader context of ancient Mediterranean religions. Yet the scale and centrality of sacrifice, especially human sacrifice, in Carthaginian public life, gave the city a grim distinction. The Tophet, that open-air sanctuary near the harbour, stood as the epicenter of this religious devotion. Archaeologists have unearthed urns filled with the charred remains of infants and animals, often accompanied by inscriptions invoking the favor of Baal Hammon or Tanit. These remains, numbering in the thousands, tell a tale of systematic ritual, not sporadic desperation. Some scholars argue these were symbolic acts, that the children died of natural causes and were consecrated afterwards. But the consistency of cremation, the age of the children, and the inscriptions suggest a darker reality. In times of crisis, plague, famine, war, these sacrifices increased, suggesting that Carthage believed the gods demanded blood for salvation. These offerings were not marginal. They were performed by the elite, the ruling families who believed their devotion safeguarded the state. The priests, dressed in ceremonial garb and conducting elaborate rites, stood as mediators between mortals and the divine. The sounds of flutes and drums often drowned the cries of the young according to hostile sources, an image that lingers in cultural memory. But the religion of Carthage was not only about blood, it was also about abundance, fertility, the cycles of the sun and moon, the ebb and flow of the Mediterranean. Baal Hammon was not just a devourer of life. He was its giver, its sustainer. His consort Tanit, often depicted with upraised arms and a solar disk, symbolized both maternal care and divine protection. Together, they embodied the dual nature of nature itself, capricious and kind, fertile and cruel. Their temples were places of prophecy and power, guarded by sacred architecture and attended by a priestly caste that wielded immense influence over Carthage's civic life. The lines between the religious and political were blurred. Decisions of war and peace were made with divine consultation. Omens and signs were interpreted before fleets sailed. Victories were celebrated with public rituals, defeats explained through divine displeasure. Even in the Senate, piety and politics were, really entwined. Carthage's greatness, its wealth, its resilience, these were not merely attributed to commerce or strategy, but to divine favor. The gods were stakeholders in empire. And so, as the city expanded its dominion, it exported not only goods, but gods. Shrines to Baal and Tanit appeared in colonies across North Africa, Iberia, and Sicily. This diffusion of cult reinforced Carthaginian identity across its far-flung territories, binding a diverse people under shared rites. But to outsiders, Greeks, Romans, even other Phoenician cities, this religion became a point of revulsion. To the Romans especially, Carthage was not just a rival power, but, a civilization of abominable gods and alien rites. This moral disgust would become part of the justification for total war. Even long after Carthage's fall, the spectre of child sacrifice haunted its memory, used to portray its people as barbarous and unworthy of survival. Whether the full scope of this practice was as brutal as the sources claim remains debated, but what is clear is that Carthage's faith was foundational. It gave the city its unity, its structure, its pride, and perhaps its doom. For in a world where gods demanded the lives of the innocent, and where state and altar were inseparable, mercy had no place. When Rome came with fire and steel, it faced not only soldiers, but zealots, defenders of a sacred legacy. The city that once fed its gods would, in time, feed the flames. And in the end, it was not only a city that died, but a faith, a way of life, a sacred order built on the blood of generations, burned into the ashes of history.